Welcome to this edition of the High Strangeness Factor, copyrighted on the Paranormal UK Radio Network. I am your host, Steve Ward. On the High Strangeness Factor, we delve into all aspects of the paranormal and the unexplained. We are most interested in the patterns and the underlying connections that lie beneath the surface. Andy Mercer, welcome back to the High Strangeness Factor.
Hello, it's been a while. I was just checking. It's been December, I think, was the last time we worked on a show together. I've had so much going on the last couple of months. I just hadn't found the time, which is rather annoying. But managed to fill a couple of gaps. I think we've had after Christmas, where I did a couple of rebroadcasts of my old show, Radio Hermetica. We did one a couple of weeks ago, I think, when you were otherwise engaged. But yeah, it's all good. It's all pretty good.
Well, I always appreciate you being able to fill in one of your golden oldies, and I think people appreciate it too. And it's nice that people can revisit some of those shows.
It's a little different to what we normally talk about. I'm running out, though, I must admit. I didn't do it for very long. I just, again, I had the time to do it, to be honest with you. But got one or two still lurking if needed at some point in the future, so we're all right for now.
Well, that's good to know. But people should know that even if they don't hear your voice, your presence is felt, because the show would never get up there for people to listen to if not for your efforts.
Oh, yes, I do all the chopping and changing and the editing. And actually, I just had the music these days. Your show's good enough. I don't have to do anything to it, really.
Oh, that's good. That's good. I hate to I have thought of some potential guests that I could have on, but then I thought, no, that won't work. Andy would have to be up till the late hours trying to edit the stuff out that I would have to get out. So, but anyway, what's going on with you? I know you've had a new book out on Dante fairly recently.
Yes, my book on the Inferno by Dante. It's part of the Divine Comedy series of books. The first one is his descent into hell, and my book looks at the occult aspects of that journey. And there are quite a few, whether Dante intended them or not, I don't know, but you can certainly look at it from an occult filter, certainly, which was written quite quickly, actually, for me. Very, very fast. I mean, in a couple of months, which is very unusual. I usually take years to write anything. But again, my other book, the one on the runes, has finally been released properly now. It's available and it's been selling rather well, so I'm pleased about that. And I've just started work on a new book, which I shall say nothing about for the time being, but it's I'm going to be working on over the next couple of months. Again, it's a compilation of old stuff I've written years ago, so it shouldn't take me too long to put together, but that's I'll keep quiet about for the time being.
Is there any fiction in your future?
Well, funnily enough, I've been a bit of a change. Anyone listening previously will know I've been working on a crime fiction novel, which was going to be based in New York. Now, I have shown it to a few friends who are Americans, and a couple have said, yeah, it's nice, it's okay. A couple pointed out there was a bit too much Britishism, shall we say, that they can kind of give away the fact I'm not actually American. So I've decided to completely recast it, and it's now set in London. Same story, but I completely changed it around. I've been watching a lot of UK crime fiction recently. I absolutely love the stuff. My wife and I binge watch these sorts of stuff, both American and British crime stuff. And we've got a lot of new British stuff recently. So I'm resetting the whole thing. It's now based in London. It's the same story, which Steve has read some of. They've got the kind of house out, but it's all now reset in London instead of New York. So I am still going to be a long-term project, eventually writing that. But that's kind of in the background, being sort of fiddled about with occasionally.
Well, it does. What I read does pull you in right away, and it is quite intriguing. By the way, for your Dante book, now the last time, I guess I'm going to have to reread Dante's Inferno, because the last time I read it, I was assigned to me in school a few eons ago, so it's not really fresh in my memory. So I'll definitely have to pick that up again.
I mean, you can kind of get an idea of the whole basis of the poem from what I've written. It's but you can read it side by side. And I mean, there are various versions available online. You can just look at easily online. I say it was written in the 1300s, so it's been around a long time and translated into English back in about 1811, I think was the first translation, or in 1790. But it's been around for a while. But I do actually recommend a couple of particular translations, because it's actually in Italian, obviously, that I list in the book that are well worth, if you can get hold of. But they're both your paperbacks, not expensive, but they're well worth getting hold of those versions to read in parallel. But if you have even just some idea of the Inferno, you'll get a sense of what enough I'm talking about from just a general understanding of it. So,
sounds really good. Well, let me introduce our guest, and this is going to be a lot of fun, because this will be the three of us will be together again after quite some time.
Mm-hmm.
Zelia Edgar has had a lifelong interest in the paranormal and has been seriously studying it for over a decade. In that time, she has worked as a certified field investigator and state director for Wisconsin MUFON, and stepped down from those positions to focus more attention on her own research. Cases that transcend the boundaries of seemingly different types of phenomena are of special interest to her. Major influences on her research include, but are not limited to, John Keel, Jacques Vallée, and Ivan Sanderson. She has her own YouTube channel, Just Another Tinfoil Hat, and hosts a paranormal radio show of the same name on the same channel. Zelia has appeared as a guest on multiple podcasts and radio shows, including The High Strangeness Factor, Spaced Out Radio, Ghostly Talk, and many, many, many others, and has contributed an article to Brent Rain's Alternate Perceptions online magazine called Knitcaps and Coveralls. She is currently co-authoring a book with Dean Bertram. In addition to researching the paranormal, she writes weird, horror, and cosmic fiction. You can contact her at her website, www.justanothertinfoilhat.com. Zelia, welcome back to the High Strangeness Factor.
Well, hey, Steve, thank you so much for having me back on the show. I'm really excited to be here tonight. And hi, Andy, as well. Nice talking with you again.
Hello, how you doing?
Yeah, really good.
Excellent.
So first, I think we might want to update some of the things you've been doing, and tell us about the new place to find your radio show, which started out on the Paranormal UK Radio Network.
Yes, so as of right now, I've still been recording podcasts and actually releasing them on 2 parts just on my YouTube channel. So right up with all of my other videos, and that's Just Another Tinfoil Hat on YouTube. So yeah, I've been doing part 1, and then 2 weeks later I have part 2. And so that's been monthly so far, yeah.
And also, you have that's called a patron account or a
Patreon
a
account.
Oh, yep. Patreon, okay. And which I am a proud member, by the way. And it's kind of nice because when you do 2-parters, you get access to the second part right away. And also, I've been getting these cool little, kind of like a postcard, a photograph of you and one of your excursions, and with an explanation on the back of what it refers to.
Yeah, so that's fairly new as well. I think I started it up just in January, and there are, several different tiers of different rewards and things you can get. And yeah, the photo card is, I call it the CE3, the Close Encounter 3. So that's like the highest tier available.
Oh, cool.
I've got I have a lot of fun doing those. It's just so neat to be able to go out and see these locations where something weird has happened, or just have a bizarre legacy of some sort. So.
Well, I think the first one I got, you're off in the winter wonderland of Wisconsin, I think somewhere. I think it was there was a dogman sighting there. Do I have that right?
Yeah, in the Horicon Marsh. That whole area is there's a lot of really strange kind of lore to that area. There's one particular account actually that came to me from someone I know, where as a kid, back in like the early 90s, I think it was, he saw this strange shadowy figure just standing out on the lake. In that area. And, it's one of those weird things. Was it an apparition? Is it almost kind of in line with like the Wendigo lore of this area? So yeah, lots of weirdness in that area.
Well, and I know you've been putting the money to good use. You got I forget what it's called, but it's some kind of a resource where you can find newspaper articles and so forth that you've been able to tap into. What's that called again?
Yeah, that's the membership to newspapers.com. And that's been invaluable because, so often it's like you'll see, a story in a book. Like the Wetzel encounter is a perfect example of this. And yeah, you can get quite a bit of information about the sighting. But if you can go back and see, the actual articles that were published at the time, not only can you get close to the source information, but also too, you find some just hilarious, like with the Wetzel encounter, the papers were actually calling it the abominable no man, And so often you kind of see this story, but then you also see, the sad truth, which is that a lot of these encounters too are kind of spun in sort of fanciful or whimsical ways. So I think that's really neat to kind of be able to go back to that time with some of these classic encounters and, really see, again, the source material and also how it was spun as time went on. Because a lot of the times these articles would appear in the paper initially almost with more of a serious tone. And then as time went on, they would kind of devolve into, oh yeah, look at that guy claimed that he saw, some lizard man out on the road somewhere. So it's just neat to see.
Well, it's very cool because there's a couple of your fairly recent YouTube videos, the subjects, where I've known of them, but then I thought, wow, she's got all this extra information that I didn't have, that I didn't get out of the books or the sources that I had. So it's really, I'm going to have to check into that myself. But also, I've got, as you know, I've got several. I don't know if you were ever familiar with, Andy, the UFO news clipping service. It started in the late '60s. Who was it? Lucius Farish, I think, who was a big name, and then Rod Dyke, I think, may have took it over. But what they did was they subscribed to all their various news clipping services, called together all the UFO and Fortean sightings, and then published it in a form where for $5 a month you could get these articles from all over the world. They'd have the U.S. section, they'd have the foreign section, and a Fortean section. And it was invaluable because so many times people would say, well, the UFO sightings have tapered off. The aliens aren't visiting us anymore. But if you were to look at the new UFO news clipping service, you'd find that people were reporting these things locally all the time. Oh. It's just that the mainstream press wasn't picking them up. So I've gone into my archives and I'm copying some for Zelia from the 70s, because this poor lady is so young that she was deprived from living through the golden age of the 1970s when all those publications were available.
I think it was more of a golden age of isolation over here. I didn't know. I knew nobody of any interest. I had no idea such things even existed over here in the UK. So no, she's in the golden age now. Zelia is not us.
Oh, but that's good to hear. I know sometimes when I do look back on all of these old articles, I'm like, man, if I had a time machine, though, I mean, who wouldn't want a time machine? Come on, but
Yeah.
Well, Andy, I have to tell you, if you type in on Amazon collected issues, there's a whole series of these. They're being put out by something called the Saucerian Publisher, and they're like old magazines and newsletters from these different UFO groups from the 50s and 60s that have been forgotten. There's one here is the collected issues of the London Unidentified Flying Object Research Organization, Roy Stenman. And it goes from 1959 to 1961. So you go through these things and you read the letters and the sightings and everything. These are pieces of history of the UFOs and the paranormal that have been forgotten.
Wow. Yeah.
Good stuff. So let's see. Now, Zelia, your new show, well, the same show, just another tinfoil hat, is now available on your YouTube channel. Is it streaming exclusively, or is there a podcast involved?
Unfortunately, I haven't yet figured out a platform other than YouTube. I know I've had several people ask me for one, so I'm definitely looking into it. And truth be told, I'm terrible with computer stuff. I know that probably is a little ironic, but yeah, I'm still trying to figure out exactly where I should go with that. But I am definitely looking into it, because I know even, I've been releasing old episodes too, just onto YouTube sparingly here and there. So it would be nice to kind of compile them all in one spot.
It will be nice, and I'm a podcast. I'm a download kind of guy, so there's a lot of people that like to be able to be mobile and listen to them. So hopefully that will come about in the future. Tell us about some of the recent shows that you've done that they can find on your YouTube channel. Some of the interviews you've done.
Well, my most recent one was with Brian Seach, which that was just a fantastic time. I know that Brian Seach super well, and he was just so interesting. I mean, he spent so much time out in the field talking with people and, kind of firsthand at these locations. But in addition to that, too, I was just thrilled to find out that he is yet another person who's interested in light anomalies, which, of course, that's a passion of mine. So yeah, Brian, that was a fantastic episode. And then, gosh, the months are kind of blending one into the other, but I think that my one before that was with biologist Wild Trees, and, yes, that's a pseudonym. That was just another really awesome show. He has some very, almost Ivan Sanderson-like theories on paranormal phenomena, especially as it pertains to cryptids, coming at it from a standpoint, again, of, biology. So yeah, I've just, it's amazing being able to talk to people who are in this field and make these connections and things like that. Because I truthfully think that the more people can network with the information they have, the better chance we are of getting anywhere with trying to understand what these things exactly are. So,
Yes, and Brian Seach, of course, you and I are, and your mom are destined to travel to the faraway state of Pennsylvania to go to the Butler Paranormal Conference. Butler is in the general Pittsburgh area, and you're going to be speaking there. And Brian, actually, it's Dan Hagman is the gentleman that runs the conference. Brian and Terry Seach are people that also help him run it. And so, what is it that you're going to be talking about at the Butler Paranormal Conference?
Well, I am super excited because this is actually what I'm talking about is a cross section of two of my biggest interests, which I guess we can get to that in a minute here too. I'm going to be discussing. The title is Nick Caps and Coveralls, the issue of UFO occupant clothing. So it's the same concept that was my article for Alternate Perceptions, just definitely like expanded and expounded upon. And, I know that when I first tell this to people, they're kind of like taken aback, like, okay, what's up with UFO occupant clothing? It's not really an aspect of the phenomenon that's been given much thought. But I really became intrigued with that for two separate reasons. The first is I love costumes and costuming. That's a massive interest for me. It always has been. I mean, Halloween has been my favorite holiday since forever. And I think that there's a lot of worth in even the concept of a costume or disguise, because for as much as it covers something up, it's also kind of a revelation, in my opinion. And especially, too, I could talk about this forever, because, then I become interested in like comics and film and stuff like that. And this one particular aspect is always kind of handcrafted to convey a certain idea or a certain theme. So that's sort of like this nebulous interest that I've always had. But then the second thing that really made this particular issue occur to me was actually the Flatwoods Monster. Because, of course, the Flatwoods Monster was a fantastically, kind of high mid-century robotic sort of beast that supposedly came from a downed UFO in Braxton County, West Virginia. And when I first really started researching that case, the thing that hit me is, hey, this is exactly what we should be looking for if we're looking for extraterrestrial biological entities. We have an entity that appeared very robotic. If it wasn't some sort of machine itself, it was definitely a very protective suit or covering for what we may assume is a biological entity inside of it. And that was kind of this revelation for me, because so many of these cases then where entities are observed in conjunction with UFOs, you have these things that are, one, wearing no protective gear, and two, wearing outfits that harken back to fairy lore. You see a lot of tunics, you see a lot of coveralls. There's the fantastic Trasco encounter where the entity in question was wearing what the man described as a tam o' shanter. So, I think that there's a lot of worth in looking at this one particular aspect for how it kind of possibly reflects, maybe long-running trends in what people are seeing, maybe it reflects some aspect of the subconscious. So, yeah, in the canned version, that's kind of the concept that I'm going with here.
Well, that's something that those that look at this as strictly objectively real, nuts and bolts, flesh and blood, haven't really dealt with. I think what they do is they say, well, we must be being visited by hundreds of different alien races, and each
yes.
one of them have different needs, and some can breathe our atmosphere, and but you know what happened in War of the Worlds when they breathed our atmosphere? The creeps all died, which was very fortunate for us back in the 1800s, I guess. But
no kidding. But yeah, no, I mean, that's another aspect of it too, is even simply the entity types and the countless types of craft that are observed. It just, again, I suppose, because Ivan Sanderson, I know, was kind of a proponent of kind of like the alien parade, I guess you could say, that there are just countless different alien races that are visiting Earth for whatever reason, and that accounts for all of the different variations, which, while, technically you could follow that logic, to me, who, again, I'm very much a Keelian, I tend to prefer the concept that these may be temporary manifestations or projections of some sort, which would easily account for the many, many different variations on a single theme.
Yeah, definitely.
Yes. Now let's go off. Let's follow this just a little bit. Well, as you know, I'm very much a Keelian, And back in the old days, I completely rejected E.T. Once I went to the Church of John Keel and so forth. But I even began to think that perhaps with Carl Jung's ideas that we were dealing with. I mean, I actually said out loud things like we're dealing with a psychic projections from a collective human subconscious, and of course, people would run away when I said that. But and I do think that there's much to that. There's this sort of I don't know, a shared. It's almost like we're co-creators with this phenomena. There's the reflective factor that Keel talks so much about. However, and I want maybe both you guys to get in on this. There are some cases that seem to be very physical. I mean, I can believe that some of these things perhaps are entities from elsewhere. When you look at the very strange from UFO Danger Zone, covered by Bob Pratt, went down to South America about a dozen times, and you've got these backwoods farmers being attempted to be kidnapped by these aliens or whatever, pulling them up in their craft and so forth. This doesn't seem like a transmogrification of energy. It doesn't seem like something projected or imagined. So I'm just wondering, Zelia and Andy, what do you guys think about the possibility of both things going on? Not just the Keel valet viewpoint, but perhaps that some of this is actually something alien or extra-dimensional.
Well, I know for me, I definitely think that the paranormal, every single aspect of it, could possibly be a mixed bag. When I started my interest in this, I've said this a million times, so apologies to anyone for whom this is a rerun. I started really interested in cryptozoology, and everything was, explainable through that lens. And then I kind of moved on. I became interested in spectrology, and then I moved further, and I became interested in ufology. And then I hit Keel. And for a while there, I was like, well, okay, this explains everything. It's all done now. Everything fits in to his concept of the superspectrum and ultra-terrestrials.
And I felt the same way.
Yeah, and now I've kind of drawn back a little bit because I do think that in some cases there also seem to be stable threads, running through these different encounters or running through a vast expanse of time or space, where it seems like we have an objective occurrence which has been repeated many times. Especially I've got a lot of nostalgia for Bigfoot. And I am the first to admit that there is a lot of high strangeness with Sasquatch that can't be explained by simply some undiscovered primate. Past that point, though, I do think that there's enough room for there to be whatever that is, whatever the high strangeness side is, whatever Doc Priestley encountered when he was near Marlinton that stopped his car twice, as well as possibly a species that is as of yet unknown. So I'm very open to the concept that there's likely multiple things going on, especially extraterrestrial life. I mean, it's impossible to believe that we are the only planet with life is the way I look at it as well. So yeah, I think it's definitely a mixed bag.
Andy, you've given this a lot of thought. What's your feeling about all this?
Well, I do certainly still hold quite strongly with Keel's stroke Carl Jung's ideas. I think probably the better way of putting it. I think for me, my background is a little different to both of you guys. Mine's more been the supernatural ghost phenomena that I've been investigating more over the years than anything else. And certainly, I mean, it's interesting because I think you can really cause manifestations to occur that can be seen to be physically real, that can actually have real world effect, yet still be part of a non-physical reality, if you like. I mean, that sounds a bit bizarre and contradictory, I know, but I mean, actually, an awful lot. My involvement sort of the occult and the esoteric as well has shown me that you can cause influence to occur around you, to things that actually happen that you're trying to make happen with magic, if you like, has caused those things to occur. Now, whether they have a independent existence beyond us is another question entirely, but certainly we can manifest stuff. So I am certainly of the mind, as I think we all are, that UFOs are not necessarily nuts and bolts spaceships from other planets, but there is also the idea that they can be from some altered reality that is here simultaneous to us. Is like the ultra-terrestrial idea or the others idea. I think for me that it leans more in that general direction, that it's either a combination of what we can do ourselves, but collectively, not imagination not being made up, but collectively generated, but also that there is some presence that moves around us. But I know I've said this many times, that I absolutely believe it's completely amorphous. It takes on the form that we give it, how we perceive it based on our own understanding. That's why I think you have so many different kinds of UFOs are sighted and so many different kinds of aliens are seen, because either there are hundreds of different races and spaceships landing here all the time, or there is just this one form that then takes on identity that fits the person who's observing it. So,
yeah, I still think there's much to that. And perhaps, I mean, the idea has been floated that perhaps some of these things are physical, and then there's this aspect, this reflective aspect in human consciousness that copies them. So you have the real unknown flesh and blood Bigfoot up in British Columbia, and then you have the really strange ones in Pennsylvania in the 70s that had green glowing eyes and disappeared when they were shot with a shotgun. But it's just that some of these reports seem to be so physical and permanent. So I'm just not completely, I'm still very much a Keelian, and there's still that thread still very much explains which, so many things that can't be explained by a purely objective nuts and bolts perspective. But, there is kind of that paradox there. But, I don't have any problem with these, I don't know, thought forms, tulpas or whatever, being temporal and leaving footprints and so forth. But I guess I'm kind of on the same page with Zelia, where I have, I don't think any of our thinking is static, and we're open to. That's one of the problems with part of the Bigfoot community. Forgive me, guys, but the flesh and blood Bigfoot community, they don't listen to the reports of people that are experiencing high strangeness. And I know a Bigfoot researcher named Tom Powell said that when he talked to people that had these experiences and he related to them that others have had them, they were absolutely relieved that other people had experienced the Bigfoot phenomena with some of the high strangeness. And they didn't think they were, it's crazy enough, I guess, seeing a Bigfoot. But when the thing disappears, it does something really, really wacky, then you think, oh my God, I've lost it.
Yeah, I think for me, it comes down to a very fundamental question of what's described as the subject-object relation, that they're somehow split separately. That this objective reality is just this reality that's in front of us now that we see around us. That there is a kind of clear division between the subject yourself and the reality object of the world around you. If you take that out of the equation and say, well, we can't be entirely sure that what is clearly objective and what's clearly just subjective, that you stop saying one is either or and recognise the kind of blurring of the two, and I think it opens up the possibility to things like, say, thought forms that become real beyond the thinker, if you like, that are left behind by the thinker, if you like, that there's a physical reality to them that continues to exist even beyond the person who may have seen it first of all, that they form the energy into something it's become a something, it's a thing now that actually exists. That, if enough people believe the Bigfoot is out there, then something starts to manifest as Bigfoot because so many people believe it exists already. It becomes almost chicken and egg, which one comes first. But, as we've said before, the kind of description of what Bigfoot can appear to do, or the fact it can remain so elusive for so long, suggests it's more than just some flesh and blood creature that's good at hiding. There's more going on there than that. But as you say, those that prefer to think of just flesh and blood will always dismiss that idea, because I think they see it as much more scientific to say it's a flesh and blood creature that's remained hidden. That seems more reasonable and acceptable than the idea that it's something beyond that. So I can see that can be a problem for some people, certainly.
Have you both, you Zelia and Andy, have you read the introduction to A Dictionary of Angels by Gustav Davidson?
Well, I've got the book over on my shelf, so yes.
Yeah, there's that.
Strange. I mean, actually, I know what you're saying. That highlights that whole idea. As he was working on the dictionary, he's having all sorts of really weird things going on around him. So, absolutely, yeah, that is that unintentional manifestation. Now, much of Western magic is about incantations for manifestation. You're trying to bring a spirit either into your presence in the room with you or through a medium of a mirror or a crystal. But you are trying to connect that manifestation, and it's a big discussion in the world of the occult whether you're manifesting, i.e. you're helping it create this thing, or it's coming from elsewhere to you, that it's a real separate entity. And I've often said that I don't see it as being that, but I don't see it as just being purely imagination, which is what some people would say, that it's in that weird kind of middle ground. It exists independently of us, but doesn't have an identity other than that which you start to put on it. But it will behave exactly as expected because it's fulfilling that criteria of its existence.
Well, Zelia, I first read that in the Mothman Prophecies, the quote that, yes, and it's so creepy. This guy it's winter and he's crossing a field that he's not that familiar with. And all these apparitions are bursting up in front of him. And he doesn't know if it's an angel or the devil or what it is. And that's it's worth it to get that book just to read the introduction because it's just fascinating. None of that has happened to me when I've been immersed in stuff, which I guess is a good thing because I'm not sure I have the mettle to put up with apparitions jumping in front of me in an unknown field. But anyway, let's Zelia, let's talk a little bit about some of your recent YouTube videos, which people really need to check out on Just Another Tinfoil Hat, because from the responses, every once in a while you'll hit something that I didn't know about. I shouldn't tell anybody that, but I'm supposed to be the guy that knows all this stuff.
Well, that's a surprise to me too.
or you hit an angle on something that I didn't know about, and I can tell by the responses that people really enjoy the subjects that you take. So tell us about tell us a little bit about the Trasco encounter. Was that the one you just mentioned a little bit? Was that the guy with the cap?
Yes, that was a fantastic account. I mean, I am a sucker for these high strangeness kind of folkloric UFO cases. And this is definitely one for the books, simply because the entity involved, I mean, straight up, the gentleman who saw it, John Trasco, and the sighting was in 1957. So John Trasco was just a paper mill worker. He had just returned home from work. And he was actually going to feed his dog. And apparently this dog was a very nasty-tempered, large animal. And as he was, going out to feed the animal, his wife noticed this strange, she thought it was like a puddle of light reflecting kind of in front of this outbuilding where the dog was kept. And upon closer inspection, it was actually this strange luminous object. Now, what she didn't see, because apparently some bushes were in the way, was what John Trasco witnessed, which was this strange little man who he described as looking like a leprechaun. And I know. And so, immediately I'm thinking, okay, so probably green coveralls, because, speaking of UFO occupant clothing, that's a very common description of their clothing is these green coveralls. But no, his outfit was actually complete with what Trasco described as a Tam O'Shanter style hat. So already we have this simply fantastic entity, and he was also described as having like a putty-like face, just this really bizarre thing. He was wearing gloves that apparently had little lights on the tip of each finger. But then to make matters even weirder, apparently he told John in what he described as some strange broken voice. He actually said that it sounded like he came from the other side, and I'm truthfully not exactly sure what he meant by that. He said, "We don't want no trouble, we just want your dog." Yeah. So just a really fantastic case. And now the odd thing here, too, and this is something that's, there's so many bizarre it's a strange little space leprechaun asking to take his dog. What's not weird about that? But, so many of these cases have just things that don't make much sense, because here we have, this entity near a saucer, and it's asking for the dog, and John Trasco simply looks at it and says, "Get the hell out of here." And it does. So if we're looking, again, at UFO entities as some sort of advanced race, well, especially considering, too, the common motif of abductions, you'd think that it just would have grabbed the dog and been on its merry way. But no, it didn't. It actually retreated right back into its craft through no visible entry point.
You think it would have some kind of fancy dog-catching butterfly affair,
I know, right? A stun gun or something. But even weirder than that is that actually on the very same day that the Trasco encounter occurred, and this occurred in Everettstown, New Jersey, there was an encounter. Gosh, I want to say it was in Tennessee or Kentucky. My brain is failing me right now. By a boy named Everett Clark, who earlier that morning claimed that he saw a very similar thing play out. He said that he saw this strange luminous craft outside of his house, and then what he described as 4 astronauts who looked like Germans were chasing after his dog. So same day we have this encounter, which really mirrored the Trasco encounter. And then we also have the bizarre name game of Everettstown, which was the location of Trasco's encounter, versus Everett Clark, which was the other encounter. So, and I just absolutely love that case because, I mean, you can't beat a space leprechaun, truthfully.
Well, you bring that up, and some of these encounters that back in the old days when I used to read these in Jim and Coral Lorenzen's books on UFO occupants, the Close Encounters of the Third Kind, and when we thought they were aliens coming from elsewhere, and that was at least that part of it was solved. I think of the absurdity of some of these, like the Cisco Grove encounter in California, where the guys are bow hunters, and the one guy gets separated from his group, and he climbs up in a tree to sleep, to stay away from wild animals, and he sees this craft, and they send out kind of a robot like that, because the little critters, they're trying to climb the tree, but they can't get up at them, and so this robot supposedly lets off this vapor, which is nauseating, and he passes out. And they were trying to get him to become unconscious so he'll fall out of the tree. That's what aliens from, I don't know, Zeta Reticuli have to capture humans with. I mean, Good Lord, they must not have had the most recent model.
Well, considering so many of their flying saucers break down, I mean, the number of times that a crash is reported, or even the older airship encounters, these things need repairs all the time. So whoever makes these flying saucers, it's a bad dealership, man.
And how many times? Go ahead, Andy.
I can say it's crazy to think how far these craft are supposed to have flown, and yet they break down so easily when they're here. It just doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Well, think how many times that people are traveling along the road, and maybe the thing is landed on the road or next to the road. You see the little guys in silver suits look like they're trying to fix something at the last minute.
Yep.
They see they see us. They get back and they just fixed the craft, and they took off. And even the famous Socorro, New Mexico, with Lonnie Zamora, very credible witness. And I revisited that recently with Ray Stanford's book that he wrote years ago. He was one of the people on the scene with Dr. Hynek, and that was just bizarre, because this thing takes off with a roar, and it's got like a flame coming from the bottom. Well, we're so used to the saucer or the egg-shaped objects just humming or not making any noise at all. Mm-hmm. But this is an older model, I guess. Maybe his dad got him this because, for his first summer job or something like that. And this one had an old ignition system or something. But so many of these things have that absurd factor, like you just pointed out with the Trasco encounter.
Well, and on the topic of repairs, too, it's just odd because, too, we have these just vastly different ends of the spectrum. There was this fantastic case, and I wish I could remember the date for it, that was cited in Messengers of Deception, which is one of my favorite valet books. And I believe it was an Air Force pilot was driving down a road, and all of a sudden he sees a flying saucer, and he said that there was a normal-looking guy inside of it repairing it. And so you have, there's normal-looking guy repairing it. We have all these entities repairing their flying saucers and UFOs. But then on the opposite end of the spectrum, we have the fantastic Jerry Townsend encounter from 1965 in Minnesota, better known as the beer can aliens. And when this poor dude was driving down the road, he sees a classic mid-century rocket, pretty much parked in the middle of the road. There's like a puddle of like some oily substance. And these little robots are outside tinkering with it, and so it's like, again, we see this motif kind of the repairs being done, or something went wrong, and of course he actually tried to tip the thing over, thinking no one else would believe him. But I guess the beer cans, he described them as oil cans, but given the Midwest's traditions, I guess, it was translated to beer cans. And they scuttled back inside, and he drove away thinking he was going to get someone, and when he got back, it was gone. So, it's so odd, because across the board, no matter what the entities look like, no matter what the craft looks like, we're kind of seeing the same thing play out.
You mentioned briefly the W.D. Doc Priestley and the Bigfoot encounter that stopped his car. Could you talk a little bit about that? And then sometimes I'll talk about that with the one you called the flight suit encounter, which is a great name for it. Do you see tell us a little bit about those, but do you see any interesting parallels between the two incidents?
Oh, absolutely. So the Marlington encounter of, poor old Doc Priestley, that's one of my all-time favorites, just because it's so...
And can I just interrupt you for a second?
Absolutely.
When I met Zelia, and we both gave our talks at the Van Meter Visitor Festival. We talked about different general subjects, but we both used that particular incident, that particular encounter with Dr. Priestley, which I think foretold something. I don't know what, but it meant we were on the same wavelength, which might be bad for Zelia, and she might need some psychotherapy. But it was just kind of cool, really, and seriously, that we both picked the same very obscure encounter to talk about at the Van Meter Festival. But go ahead.
Oh yeah, no, I think it's totally synchronistic, man. Like, because I know I was listening to your presentation you brought up, and I was like, holy smokes, what are the chances? Like, oh man. Yeah, no, it was just totally wild. And I love this case because, we're so used to hearing about the EM effect from UFOs and even ghosts now that it's just it's par for the course. But in this case, Doc Priestley was driving near Marlington, West Virginia. It was 1960. And he was actually following some of his friends who were in some sort of camper bus. They were all going to go turkey hunting. And all of a sudden, his car started stalling. And he looked to the side of the road and claimed that he saw a Sasquatch-like creature with its hair standing on end, looking at him. And so I guess the car stopped completely, and he was sitting there for who knows how long until his buddies realized that he was no longer behind them. And so they retreated. The creature ran off when it saw the bus coming, and his car miraculously started back up. Now, as weird as that is, several miles down the road, the car started acting up again. Again, it kind of coasted to the side of the road, and again, Doc Priestley looked out the side window to see the same creature, and its hair was still standing on end. So I truthfully don't know how long he sat there then until his buddies hopefully realized that he was no longer there. But no, it's a fantastic case. And again, too, you get so many details from the old newspaper articles. Apparently, he said that he only came forward, I believe the encounter happened in November. He only came forward in January because he said he wanted to return to the same location to do some deer hunting. And he thought that if he told anyone, his friends wouldn't want to go with him. So
that even makes it more believable,
I know, right? I know, because people are, well, why'd you wait so long? And a lot of the time it has to do with ridicule. But no, Doc Priestley was like, well, I wanted to go back and do some deer hunting. So I love that case because here we have a sighting of a cryptid, which generally, again, conventionally speaking, they're as far away from any sort of electromagnetic effect because why would they produce any sort of electromagnetic effect? But each time the car burnt out, there was this creature with its hair standing on end. And actually the car, apparently, the points were completely fried and it couldn't be driven ever again after that. So that is the Marlington encounter. And I do believe that it bears quite a similarity to, yes, the flight suit creature. And that occurred in January of 1972, and there were actually 4 teenagers. And it's a little odd about one of them. There's actually a detail that I didn't include in my video because it just seemed so out there that I was like not exactly sure how to approach it. But anyway, they were deciding to go and do some night fishing at the Battle Creek Bridge near Anderson, California. And they started seeing these strange lights in the sky, this bright glowing blue object up in front of them. So when they pulled over near their location, all of a sudden they heard this blood-curdling scream. And off a ways, like several yards away, there was a creature that, honestly, again, this is one, much like the Wetzel encounter, that's kind of lopped in with Bigfoot reports. And, it's one of those things where, man, if you don't know what to call something, just don't call it anything. Because they describe this thing as totally hairless, this kind of dark green or brown type creature, which was covered in pouches as though from a flight suit, is how they described it. And it had one large teardrop-shaped ear on one side of its head. It was about 7 feet tall. So understandably so, they freaked out and ran back to the car and started speeding away. But unfortunately for them, at least, the car, they didn't speed away just yet because the car wouldn't start. So they actually had to push it into action before they could get the heck out of there. However, at that point even, their story wasn't over because the entire way they were speeding back to one of the main witnesses, Daryl Rich's house, to tell his parents what had occurred. And the entire way, they were kind of being stalked by strange aerial anomalies. They said that there were these orbs of light, kind of light blue, and some others were kind of an amber orange in the fields around the road. They were seeing these strange things like soundless firecrackers going off along the roadsides. And the orbs, too, were performing these just sporadic, anomalous type, maneuvers, like vanishing as they shot straight up into the sky. One of the weirdest aspects of this case for me, though, is that they also said that they saw what looked like a humanoid figure made out of light, which is a very, very odd detail, considering that, in this case, then, technically you've got two entities observed, but one was not a luminous entity and one was. So finally, they made it back to Daryl Rich's house and convinced his dad that something had happened. And he thought that they were pulling his leg. But he grabbed his shotgun and they went back to the area. As soon as they were there, they heard this strange growling emanating from the bushes. So then the police were contacted, and apparently nothing further happened that night. But yeah, before too, we discussed kind of the connection between the Marlington case and the flight suit creature. The detail that I did not include in my video, which was actually pointed out to me then by someone through my website. So thank you very much, because yeah, again, I will kind of tease what it is by saying that I don't really delve much into true crime. I know that there's a lot of overlap between the paranormal fields and the true crime fields, but I haven't yet really gotten into that. Apparently, Daryl Rich later became a rather infamous serial killer. So I know Keel discussed a lot of kind of the psychological effects of the phenomena. Who knows if that's what it was? If nothing else, it's kind of an odd detail.
Definitely.
Yes. One of a friend of Zelia and mine, and one of my co-hosts, Brandy, that we also met at the Band Meter Visitor Festival, will be very interested in that detail, because she does follow true crime. She seems like such a sweet lady. So I don't know. I don't know what that's about.
I do wonder that you could certainly be talking about this at two possible levels. I mean, if there are electromagnetic charges and effects along those lines, it could be actually screwing up with the brain's wiring and causing people to have very unpleasant behavior patterns happening, through the fact of the exposure to this kind of actual energy that could be causing the brain to miswire, but also a very bizarre phenomenon, psychologically speaking, can send you a bit doolally. So it can be possibly happening at both levels, both a physiological change caused by anomalous energy, but a psychological change caused by anomalous experience. So the two together could possibly explain why people might suddenly start to have rather aberrant behavior patterns suddenly occur to them. But I just want to quickly go back to one thing you were saying, Andy, that it's probably kind of occurred before, but this anonymous light business, isn't it? That's the thing I found most interesting, almost as if the light form is like the pure form of these things, and then they become something else, something that we can actually see. And when you were saying about this figure of light, that really sort of rang a bell for me entirely, the idea of almost as if it's that process of manifestation becoming something, and you saw it going through that process of them becoming something that was more recognizable, be it a Bigfoot or whatever, that was part of the process. But the light anomaly that has an psychological effect upon you just by seeing it is one thing I found the most fascinating stuff I've been reading. I mean, one of the things Stephen and I talked about a while ago was the Dyatlov Pass experience, that what happened there, and two separate Russian, one was a security guard, one was a woodsman hunter, both well used to being in the woods at night, both describing seeing this strange anomalous yellow-white light that basically scared the crap out of them. Even though they're experienced nighttime hunters, were both armed, they're both ready to deal with anything, but they said they couldn't explain why the light itself made them so terrified. And yet they said both of them said it frightened the hell out of us. They were separate two. They didn't know each other. These were reports a couple of years apart, and that's an investigator found them. But that's what I find most fascinating, that whole idea of it being a light form as being its purest sense, but it's something about it as well. It's some kind of, it has an effect that's beyond just causing the light, the visual effect, you can see it, but it's causing a psychological effect as well.
Zelia, that's very Keel-esque, because he, in Trojan Horse, he thinks, he hypothesizes that perhaps that's the only objectively real thing about the experience, is the strange lights, and that people are being affected somehow. So that's very, very apropos to that. By the way, just on a serious side note, it turned out Brandy and I had both read a true crime book called The Ultimate Evil, written some years ago by Maury Terry, about the Son of Sam murders. And it is fascinating. Wow. It gets really deep into, it sounds like, conspiracy, but it sounds like this guy has really done the research. So that's really a fascinating book. And then Brandy found a podcast dedicated to it, where they, I can't remember the name of it, but they had analyzed each section of the book. But anyway, it is a fascinating area. I've read a few. There was a series of murders in Michigan, the co-ed killer, back in the late 60s. And because of the region, I got interested in that. But I don't think I have the stomach to get into too much of it. I'm just too timid, guys. What can I tell you? And let me do a brief intermission here. You are listening to The High Strangeness Factor, copyrighted on the Paranormal UK Radio Network. I am Steve Ward. My co-host is Andy Mercer, and we are talking to Zelia Edgar. Let's just switch gears a little bit because you're involved in a lot of different things, Zelia. Now, you are an entrepreneur, and you are involved in making costumes and so forth under the heading of cosplay. Was that the right way to put it?
Oh yeah. Yes, like I mentioned earlier, costuming has been honestly, between the paranormal and costuming, those interests have been with me for as long as I can remember. So I guess they're pretty deeply embedded in my personality. So yeah, yep, cosplay.
Well, it's kind of fun. I actually I actually made. I don't know if you guys know who a Commando Cody was, the Rocket Man from the old
Oh,
serials, late 40s,
yeah.
50s. Had the cool helmet and the jetpack. Well, I made that was my own cosplay. I found kind of a raincoat that kind of mimicked the leather jacket. I made the helmet looks pretty good. I made it out of a kid's helmet with Bondo and part of a basket from Kmart, and then I spray painted it, smoothed it down. It looks really good. And the jetpack I made from various PVC articles. I made it light up, and I had sound effects and everything. So I did my own cosplay for a while. But what kind of costumes have you made? What do people ask for?
Oh boy. So my shop, I've stepped it down kind of as I've been focusing more on research, but I still have a few things on there. One of my most popular things is actually technically it's from this one anime, Black Butler. It's the Undertaker hat, but it's truly a traditional funeral mute hat. That's one of my absolute favorite things to make because I am a sucker for classical millinery. That was actually my introduction to sewing, which is a little weird, was hat making. Because back when the 2010 Alice in Wonderland came out, I wanted to make, a Mad Hatter costume. So I was like, well, guess I'll take up hat making. So yeah, that's just the funeral mute style hat it's really eerie looking, just a black top hat, but then it has this long trailing sash. And so I use pretty conventional methods, wire and buckram frame, and then, cover it with black cotton. And then the inside is lined with this cool skeleton print fabric. So that's one of probably my most popular current items. And then I do a few other, different accessories and stuff, like the bandolier of thread spools from the Alice in Wonderland movie and stuff like that. I've got some knitting on there. My shop right now is definitely, it's kind of an eclectic blend of things, if that makes sense. I've got some knitting on there and stuff like that. So, but yeah, no, ever since, really kind of getting into cosplay though, like I have taken on so many different techniques for sewing and things like that. Right now, I'm really trying to master like classic suit making and things. Because in addition to anime costumes, I do a lot of I love Batman and especially the TV show Gotham. So I already made their version of the Joker's outfit from that. I'm working on the Riddler's outfit. So yeah, I know this probably sounds super dorky, but hey, what can I say?
Well, a lot of us were super dorky when we got into the paranormal. Otherwise, we wouldn't have done so. When I was a kid, of course, I was heavy into superheroes, and my mom was a great costume maker. She made me all kinds of great. If I wanted a cape or a mask, and I don't know if you guys know the Fantastic Four. The first villain they fought was called the Mole Man, and he had this cloak with this. Kind of a tall collar that came out behind it, and it had this great looking visor. Well, I love that costume, and she actually made me one of those. Of course, I wasn't an evil villain; I was a good guy. But yeah, she was just really talented, and I for Halloween I was always pretty well decked out, and I've seen some. Not telling tales out of school here, but I have seen some photographs of Zelia and her siblings at various Halloween outings, and they're usually pretty well decked out.
Well, thank you. That's nice to hear. Yeah, my mom, I mean,
Very
of
cool. And your
course,
mom, too, yes.
yeah, yeah, before I could actually sew, when I was like a baby, pretty much. No, I'm joking, totally joking. But no, she also too was just, every Halloween always made sure we had these fantastic, pretty much couture outfits. So yeah, she's just, always been such an inspiration in so many ways. So yeah, that's definitely probably where part of my interest there came from.
A couple times I got the store-bought, Ben Cooper costumes, but usually I had a pretty cool costume made by Mom. Another thing I wanted to bring up, there's several interests that you and I have in common, and it turns out that Andy also has an interest in this. And also, how did you discover H.P. Lovecraft?
That's actually a really weird roundabout story because Lovecraft, I will say right away, is honestly one of my all-time favorite authors. And even to just kind of the universe that he ended up making that was then expounded upon by other people, it's really breathtaking. And oddly enough, I found out about Lovecraft because Harry Houdini was one of my all-time favorite idols for the longest time. When I was in like my mid-teens, probably, I was just kind of borderline obsessed with Houdini. I mean, it doesn't help that he claimed Appleton, Wisconsin as his birthplace, and so you can visit. They've got this fantastic museum there at a place called the Castle. It's actually an old Masonic temple, and I got to see that. And they have some of his actual artifacts and things like that. It's just really neat. He really was a captivating figure for me, and I found out that he had been collaborating with some guy named Lovecraft on a nonfiction book called The Cancer of Superstition, because of course Houdini, in addition to being, you know, a great magician, was also hefty into debunking fraudulent spiritualists. And so I was like, oh, this seems kind of interesting. And again, I was obsessed with anything Houdini, so I was kind of doing cursory research into anyone he had associated with. I sound like such a, super fan, I suppose. And so that's how I first found out about Lovecraft. And then I found his fiction work. And of course, too, Under the Pyramids was ghostwritten for Houdini by Lovecraft. I guess the day that he married Sonia Green, they actually lost the manuscript for that, so they didn't have any time to celebrate their new marriage. They had to quickly rewrite the entire thing.
Oh my God!
Just par for the course for that guy's life.
Yes.
But yeah, that's how I found out about him. And the very first fiction work of his that I read was like a compendium of a few stories that included At the Mountains of Madness and The Whisper in Darkness.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, and he had Poe references there, and I just, because Poe has been like a lifelong idol of mine. So from that moment onward, just one of my super favorites.
So what was the first Lovecraft story you read? Do you remember?
I want to say it was The Whisper in Darkness.
Awesome.
Either that or At the Mountains of Madness. But I think they had The Whisper in Darkness first because that's quite a bit shorter than Mountains of Madness, since that's pretty much his only novel-length work.
Right. Whisper in Darkness, though, is fairly long. I have to tell a story. I was vacationing up on Bois Blanc Island, which lies in between the Upper and Lower Peninsula in Michigan. And it's an island that is not terribly commercialized, and there's a lot of woods and everything. You can imagine a Wendigo appearing up there. But it was reading this story, The Whisper in Darkness, at 2 a.m. And, I as nature dictates, I had to make a pilgrimage to the laboratory. And I didn't want to go because it was so effective, and it was so dark in that cottage that I really didn't want to leave the confines of my bed. But that's a great story. And the twist at the end when you find out what's going on is just so much of his stuff was it was really science fiction, but horror science fiction.
Yes.
Andy, what do you remember the first story you read by Lovecraft and how it affected you?
Funny enough, as you're talking about, I was trying to think. I can't remember which one in particular. I mean, I read quite a few of them pretty much all in one go. My first encounter of Lovecraft wasn't his books. It was the role-playing game Call of Cthulhu.
Oh, excellent.
I know a lot of people know things like Dungeons and Dragons, but I mean, I quite like that sort of fantasy stuff. But I wanted something a bit different, and I saw literally on one of the shops this Call of Cthulhu horror role-playing game. I thought, oh, like the sound of that. And I bought that and read the manual about how to run it, and I used to run it for my friends for years. And sometimes I think back, I wish I'd written down in more detail the stories I came up with for the plots, for the adventures. Some were quite good, actually. You could have made good novels. I bought, I can't remember which one it was. It was that was like 3 separate volumes of collected works, and they're all published by, I can't remember who it was so long ago, but I read them. Like one volume was like 200 pages long, and I read the whole thing through, about a dozen stories in one go. So I'd like to say it was Call of Cthulhu itself, but I honestly can't remember which one it was. But I wonder, have either of you two guys come across the work of Kenneth Grant, the occultist?
No.
Because a lot of his stuff, you really should have a look into it. Because a lot of his stuff is based on fundamentally on the notion the Necronomicon exists as an astral book, if you like, that was brought into reality by Lovecraft and others by their stories. But the concepts already existed. In fact, if you go back, Zelia, through the High Strangeness Factor, you'll find an early show from last year that I did, which is a rebroadcast of a show I did with a friend of mine, Richard Ward, who's written a book about some of Kenneth Grant's work, where we discussed Grant and the link to the Cthulhu stuff as well. So have a check, audience, of one of the earlier shows where Steve wasn't available and I rebroadcast my chat with Richard Ward about Kenneth Grant. I mean, it goes beyond just talking about the Cthulhu stuff and Necronomicon, but there is a wrapped up in the idea that this stuff may have pre-existed, and he's kind of brought it into reality by writing about it. Now, I'm not convinced of that idea myself, but I do understand where it's coming from, and I know people who use the Necronomicon or versions of it as if it was a real book of magic and have had results from it. This brings us back to what we said before about the idea of this stuff being amorphous, that it starts to perform in the ways you give it identity. Not only the idea of sort of paranormal stuff, but also occult related, of demons, etc., fulfilling that same kind of function. But that I think you got both would find quite interesting. He's not the easiest to read, Kenneth Grant. It kind of requires a bit of pre-knowledge of general occult topics, but you can follow through what he's talking about. But the way he links in the Lovecraft stuff, I think you both find quite fascinating. So, a question for you two guys: have you seen that recent TV series, Lovecraft County?
No, I haven't.
It's good. It wasn't quite what I was expecting. There is a lot of it being used as a platform to demonstrate, unfortunately, the racial tensions in the 1950s in America, and it does get a bit nasty in places. But there are the Lovecraftian elements are certainly there, so it is well worth watching. It gets quite gory, surprisingly gory for a TV program in places, but it's definitely worth catching it if you do get a chance, guys. I know it's on Netflix. I think it's actually on. I saw it a few weeks ago, basically watched it in a couple of days. It's like 10 episodes, but I watched like 5 at a time because I really got into it. There's not as much of the mythology as I'd like there to have been, and there's only a couple of examples of Lovecraftian creatures appearing. In fact, the best one is Cthulhu himself. He only appears briefly in the first episode, but that was really good, the way that sort of manifests. Really? That's worth checking out for definite, guys. So Lovecraft Country, sorry.
The caller... Go ahead.
No, you go ahead. No, I'm just saying I can't believe I missed that, because I keep saying I wish that, there would be. I mean, of course, I would love like a faithful movie adaptation of The Whisper in Darkness. I was actually just talking to my younger sister Chloe about that the other day, because she doesn't read Lovecraft, but we were bemoaning our lack of horror movies, and I was like, man, if someone would just do justice to that, that would be scary.
I've not seen it myself, but I know Nicolas Cage did a version of The Colour Out of Space as a movie a little while ago that's supposed to be pretty good. I've not seen it myself, but I must catch up with that.
I was a little disappointed. They started out very good.
Yes.
And but they just sort of so often go off the rails with, for my opinion, too much gore and too far away, too far afield. In fact, that was the first Lovecraft story I read late one night. With it, this wasn't up on a faraway island. I was a little safer this time. But I thought I was just blown away, because you hear I had this feeling of a horror story, but it's really just a science fiction element.
Yeah, I do. I find it strange that it's why there's not been a really good sort of A-rated, real top-quality movie made of any of the Lovecraft stories.
I don't know.
It's strange. I mean, there are elements. I do understand. I mean, one of the things Lovecraft Country does bring up is there is an inherent racism within some of the stories that is, unfortunately, a fact that we can't escape from. So maybe that's put some people off. But, I mean, if you think how many years it took us to finally get a version of Lord of the Rings actually made properly, so I do wonder if there's some technical elements of the stories that make it hard to transfer into a movie that they don't feel would have the right kind of flow to it. But who knows? It's one of those things that does mystify, where there's never been. I mean, there's been plenty of movies that have been made, but they tend to be like B movies, low budget.
Yeah. Sure.
Good.
Do you remember? Was it the Dunwich Horror with Sandra Dee?
Oh, dear.
Wasn't that supposed to be set in Wisconsin? I haven't even seen that one.
I might be wrong.
No, I've not seen it either.
It was kind of cheesy, had kind of a cool old fashioned soundtrack by Les Barker, anyway, the guy that did all those. But oh man, it just didn't have it. And then they did one called the Shuttered Room with Gig Young, which was kind of a creepy story. I mean, film adaptation, but it had nothing to do with the story. They just used the title. So, and it wasn't even originally a Lovecraft. It was an August Derleth, one of his followers. But yeah, that's too bad. You mentioned the Call of Cthulhu. I think that was the game. I think there was that generic universal role playing system that published a lot of those. They had Lovecraft, they had The Prisoner, they had every genre you could possibly think of, and I had a bunch of those at one time. I didn't care for the Dungeons and Dragons that much either. I like to go off and use the basic systems to do other things. It could be a lot of fun and very creative. And the one aspect of it that I liked was that it was like an aspect of radio, where you're with a game master setting things up, but everybody's seeing this visually and they're interacting with the storyline. So it would have been fun to have adventured in some of your Lovecraftian scenarios. Well, I have this phenomenal looking board game here called Eldritch Horror, which is based on that. And it takes place in it's a period piece for 1 to 8 players. So apparently it has some solitaire ability, but of course it has you up against the Cthulhu and his minions. And but it's like I say, it's going to take like a course, a college course, to figure out how to play it. So I don't know if it'll ever get off my shelf. You're about to say something, Zelia?
Oh, no, I know. I truthfully wish that there would be just more use made out of these stories. It just, so it is neat to hear if they are kind of, 1 or 2 neat console games out there. I mean, that would just be phenomenal to think of. I don't know, even if Nintendo could do something with that would be just sprawling and insane.
Right.
It is the best way to really get into the story. I mean, if you've got a nice big widescreen laptop or whatever, or PC, all the lights are off and you're moving your little controls and like this big creature jumps in your face and you're like, oh my God, it does work quite well.
Man, can you imagine, what is it called? VR, the virtual reality stuff with that, man.
That would be good, absolutely. Peekaboo in the game.
But of course, to properly do Lovecraft, if you're doing a film, it takes place. It's the atmosphere. It's that he's created, because oftentimes the thing or whatever it is isn't revealed to the last page. You know, and so you're not really seeing anything. But like.
Well, it'd be psychological thriller until the very end, pretty much. But there's nothing wrong with that. I mean,
no.
Yeah.
But nowadays, it's very hard to get something like that produced. And although something like The Whisper in Darkness, there could be, you could have a few incidents where you're actually seeing something or experiencing something, and before you get to the end and you find out what's actually going on. But there's a writer named Brian Lumley, who has if you Zelia and I had talked before, and she mentioned this incredible correspondence that Lovecraft had with other authors and the friendships that he developed, and like Robert Bloch, who wrote Psycho. And it's really funny because they would write stories incorporating each one of them in them with slightly different names. I think Robert Blake was Robert Bloch, and I think didn't Lovecraft kill him off in one of his stories? So there were a lot of all these inside jokes with people that knew each other from this correspondence.
Yeah, it was really neat because Bloch and Derleth both lived in Wisconsin during most of the period of time that they were corresponding with Lovecraft. So the Historical Society in Madison has a huge collection on microfilm of some of Derleth's letters back from Lovecraft, and then they actually have August Derleth's letters not the flesh, but in paper form. Those you have to wear gloves and everything to actually look at. So I only got to look at Lovecraft's letters on microfilm, but man, it was just wild to actually see his handwriting and everything. That was just so neat. Yeah.
Well, I enjoy. Now, some people are purists and they don't like anything other than what Lovecraft actually wrote. But I've always enjoyed Brian Lumley. He's gone off on some tangents and added to the mythos. And Lovecraft, when he was alive, encouraged people to do this. He had no problem with August Derleth, creating other aspects of the Cthulhu mythos. And but Lumley starts out with a great novel called The Burrowers Beneath, which is not a long novel, but it's very captivating. And then he gets into the transition of Titus Crow, and I won't go into all the plot lines, but there's a whole series that he's written, And he even gets into, Lovecraft created this strange aspect of his writing was called Dreamland, and the character of Randolph Carter. Anyway, if people haven't experienced Lovecraft, it just and if you're into science fiction, fantasy, horror, or whatever, it's really something worth checking out because he was really a master. And it's always he wrote a book called Supernatural Horror in Literature, I think, and he talks about some of his influences, like oh come on, William Hope Hodgson, who wrote The House on the Borderland. Have you read that one?
Yes, I must admit I've sort of retro discovered Hodgson after, of course, coming across Lovecraft, and I actually love his stuff. I really do enjoy his. Again, it's got this kind of mixture of some of it is more straightforward, and some of it is thinking, you can see where Lovecraft was kind of inspired by Hodgson's writing, there is definitely parallels there. But I really like his stuff.
Yeah, good stuff. What about Arthur? Who's the guy that wrote The King in Yellow?
Oh, yes.
Arthur Machen?
Machen.
The Great God Pan. Right?
Yes, I read that one, but I haven't read any of his other stories. Another one kind of in the same vein.
Yes, definitely.
And I think that it wasn't The King in Yellow another book like the Necromonicon that they would refer to, or something's evil volume or something like that?
Yeah, it pops up a few times. I haven't read The King in Yellow either, unfortunately. It's on my very long to-read list. But yeah, I know it's referenced quite a bit.
Yes.
Well, very cool. We're probably going to wrap up fairly soon, but I wanted to go back to just another tinfoil hat and a show that you and I did, and I want to bring Andy into this. Zelia and I did a two-parter where we talked about the kind of paranormal books that influenced us and the ones that we enjoy the most, and we just barely scratched the surface. There's so much, and afterwards we both thought, oh heck, we didn't mention so and so or whatever. But Andy, what are some of the classic books that have perhaps guided you or shaped your thinking a bit in the realm of the paranormal?
That's an interesting question, because I was just thinking about that as you were asking me. More than anything else, probably is Carl Jung, actually, to be perfectly honest with you, in terms of my recent thinking. I mean, I was probably of the same mind as most people, reading sort of ghost stories and ghost books, that ghosts were sort of spirits of the dead that have come back from heaven, blah, 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 all that kind of thing. And to me, it never quite rang true. I mean, I was a big horror fan, reader as well, and almost like alternate theories in there, but discovering Carl Jung long before I became a psychotherapist, I was reading his stuff and finding it absolutely fascinating, started talking about collective unconscious and the Jungian archetype ideas, and those two really resonated with me in terms of an explanation of the paranormal, that we aren't dealing with sort of ghosts from heaven or hell, we're dealing with some kind of sort of deep psych, collective unconscious manifestation. So his writings, funny enough, were probably the most influential in that respect. My background, as I said before, is more in the occult and the paranormal, supernatural stuff rather than anything to do with UFOs. So, again, reading a lot of things like the Golden Dawn's material, the Golden Dawn, its system of magic, finding the ideas of that. But probably more than anybody else was Dr. John Dee and the Enochian system of magic. Reading about John Dee. Experiences of working with crystal scrying, and I got into that as a teenager when I first read his stuff. Funny enough, I'm actually working on a book at the moment, which I mentioned at the beginning, which talks a little bit about some of the early stuff I used to do as a single lone practitioner of magic, and that includes stuff like the John Dee stuff. My first book I actually wrote was Liber Coronzon, which I actually wrote over 20 odd years ago. I'm currently working on the second edition of at the moment. That is my personal experiences working with crystal scrying and the magic of invocation into crystals, where you're trying to draw spirits into a crystal ball, literally a crystal ball, to communicate with them. And having experiences along those lines, I mean, just as a quick aside, we've got a little bit of time here, I'm transcribing some of my own notebooks from 20, 30 years ago. I've been doing this over the last couple of months on and off, and the number of anomalous, strange things happening in my house at the moment, you would not believe. 4 or 5 occasions where things have disappeared and reappeared elsewhere in the house, where there would possibly, should be. One example, that we have a cat problem locally. There's a few local cats, and one of them seems occasionally like to use our front lawn as a toilet. Wherever we spot it, we've got a little water pistol by the window, by the sink. And if he's out there, we give a quick squirt. The cat takes water, runs away. Fine. It went missing. The water pistol, which is by the sink, went missing. It's been gone for a little while. Not sure how long, but it's gone. We were looking for a vase for flowers, which is on top of a cabinet in the kitchen, but a totally different part of the kitchen. It's on a shelf. You have to get on a ladder to get to the shelf. My wife bought some flowers, so I went up to get the vase down. Next to the vase was the water pistol.
Huh.
There's no way either of us, there's only two of us in the house, there's no way either of us put it there. No way on earth. We've got, only pets, we've got a couple of guinea pigs, they didn't do it. So it's an absolute mystery. Neither one of us touched it. Absolutely did not. And it's only when I'm working on the transcription of these notes, these strange things are happening. But they're definitely happening, there's no doubt about it. So even just transcribing stuff and sort of working with it, this sort of material, causes an effect, no doubt about it. And as I say, going back to some of the weird stuff happens when we were playing the role-playing games, even though we knew it was me writing stories and they were playing a story, the atmosphere we were building, you could all feel it, feel the tension in the atmosphere. So, you definitely do generate these things just by working on them.
Well, I think I'm going to be very careful of the next book I read, that I pick to read. I mean, I lose stuff just because it's me, and the chaos that's here. I don't need any help from whatever. But anyway, yeah, that's really bizarre. Anyway, Zelia and I, that was a fun show, and be fun to revisit it sometime. But I can't even remember all the books that we talked about.
Oh man!
Of course, we talked about basic influences like Keel and Vallée, but another book that Zelia and I have been reading, and I think she completed, was one by Joshua Kuchin called Footsteps.
Where the footprints
end. Yeah. Footprints end. Right, Volume 1.
Fantastic. Totally fantastic.
Andy, Joshua Kuchin is the same one that wrote Thieves in the Night, and which talks about it's sort of almost like a sequel to Passport to Magonia, with the UFO fairy connection, but with Where the Footsteps End, it deals with Bigfoot and everything. UFOs, even witches.
Found. Witches, women in white. It's just
truly, and of course, fairies again.
Oh yes, it's just fantastic because again, too, with Bigfoot, the flesh and blood category is still very, very strong, especially with Bigfoot. I think because the search has just been on for so long, it's almost tradition now to be looking for this thing as some undiscovered primate. But man, I have just read Volume 1. I know there's Volume 2, which is on my list. But that just, there has to be something more considering how normal these abnormal reports are, where there's high strangeness involved.
Well, I find it interesting, like people like Tom Powell and other researchers that started out, Ron Moorhead, that started out thinking this was just an undocumented creature, have experienced strange lights and batteries draining from cameras and so forth, and have come to the conclusion that there's something more going on. Kuchin, and the one complaint I have about Kuchin, Andy, is he has this phenomenal list of footnotes, which forces me to go to Amazon and buy more books, either on Kindle or physically. So I'm going to have to write him a disparaging letter one of these days and tell him to stop it.
Costing you a fortune. But you do make a good point, which I do find frustrating sometimes, is the lack of footnotes in books. You read excellent descriptions of things, and there's no referencing. You can't follow these things up. So if you read any of my books, they're full of footnotes because I do like to make sure people can find what on earth I'm talking about. So it's good that people do. But yeah, he does end up buying piles and piles of books. You think, oh, I should check that one out. So there's one line in it that gets referenced. You think, oh no, I better check the book myself and go out and buy it. So yeah.
Well, sometimes I've had to the book, The David Enigma, by Pugh and Holliday, about the strange happenings in '77 in Wales. They have a list of books in the back, but I had to do really detective work to find out when they stated something in the book. I had to figure out which book it was it came from. So it wasn't, because
Yeah.
it wasn't a direct footnote, and some of the information is great, and so I really really spent a lot of time trying to track it down. But man, if you can see the stack of just the books I have on related to folklore one way or the other, it's I've had to pile it straight up because I have no room, and if I bump it, it's all going to fall on the floor.
Oh
Unfortunately,
dear, that could be disastrous.
yes. Well, it has happened many times here.
Well, funnily enough, it brings me back to some of the, it's more of a long-term project that I'm working on. I've mentioned it to Steve before, and I think you'll probably find it interesting, Zelia, as well. I wrote a couple of years back a book which was a collection of genuine witchcraft, magic spells and charms, incantations that I'd gleaned from a collection of folklore books, mainly published at the end of the 1800s, early 1900s, and compiled them together into a book which my publisher published as The Wicked Shall Decay. Now, I noticed as I was working through those spells and incantations, there were also descriptions of very strange, anomalous events, weird experiences that don't really fit into the kind of more general idea of like UFOs, etc. But things like fairies, experiences of strange creatures coming out of the ground and all that kind of stuff. But some of them are even weirder than that. I mean, examples of people with grey skin speaking weird languages without moving their mouths. That kind of thing.
Interesting.
Yeah, I mean, these books are full of them again, and what I'm working on at the moment, it's more of a long-term project, is compiling, again, like The Wicked Shall Decay, these actual examples of spells, but these examples of these first-hand descriptions, not like Mary Smith said to Joe Bloggs about what she saw 20 years ago, but the people's first-hand descriptions of what they've seen. A couple of quick examples that I've already come across, I've mentioned to Steve before, which I found fascinating, that kind of got the ball rolling with this idea in the first place. It was two examples from the Isle of Skye, north of Scotland. On one occasion, a woman was seen walking around with grey skin who appeared to be speaking an unknown language but wasn't moving her mouth when she did so. Now, more than one person described seeing this woman walking around. She appeared from nowhere and just vanished. Another occasion, two small schoolboys described as wearing grey clothing appeared to teleport a cow off a cliff and then back onto it again and then disappeared. Another example, they're just bizarre. Another example was fishermen who were out to sea when a bird landed on the top of the mast, and this the bird was about 5 or 6 foot tall, stood there with eyes looking at them for about a day, just stood on top of the mast, didn't move, and then just vanished. It's like, what?
Wow.
That is just eerie. Oh my gosh.
I think there are first-hand descriptions of people who just had no idea what to make.
Well, that's great.
Encounters.
Well, and even today, there's so many encounters that are just kind of lopped in with the closest, most tenuous thing that they could possibly be related to. When the truth is, many of these anomalies are just that, so anomalous that where do you fit that? That's fantastic.
Well, we already mentioned the variety of entities that very seldom do you have a craft or an entity that is duplicated, although it does happen. But also in some of the critters that Zelia has covered on Just Another Tinfoil Hat are sort of one-off critters.
Yeah.
They don't fit. The Enfield Horror had 3 legs.
Yeah.
I mean,
and pink flashlight eyes, and apparently was covered in slime. Like what do you call that? It's a monster.
Just point out these descriptions, but I didn't mention this. They were in the 1890s. These were a long, long time ago. So again, I think just trying a bit what we're saying though is that these descriptions of things like in spaceships and the like is almost like they are added in now in modern times because it kind of fits what we understand. But these guys had no frame of reference for these weird encounters they were seeing, so they are literally just purely the way they described it at that point. But you'd imagine that kind of sighting in the 1990s probably would have seen this in a UFO land, and these two grey people walk out of the UFO and transport the cow backwards and forwards, or this woman appeared from a UFO then it flew away. We'd imagine in more modern times you'd add that description in because that's how we perceive these things. And I think what we're saying almost is like how we see them over time has changed as well. Because the one thing that struck me was saying earlier on about these earlier sounds in the 60s were like rockets, jet rockets coming out the back of them. That almost fits like the kind of the Buck Rogers kind of 1930s spaceship going around it with the little flames coming out the back of it. That description fits the time. And the description today would be a little bit different. And again, I think they are the appearance is altering depending on our own understanding of what they're supposed to look like. And I think we'll say with these descriptions I was talking about, are fascinating because they are so old. They go back so far before there was anything flying. So there's no inclusion of anything flying in these weird descriptions because they had no concept of flight. Of course, there was no craft flying around at those times. So that's what I find with these small rural communities of no strong connections to anywhere else. So you're getting pure descriptions of exactly what they see based on their own understanding of what they were seeing. So I found that was the most fascinating of these descriptions I've come across. Like, there's no influence from TV or other media. It's just what they believe and what they believe they were seeing.
It's almost like some of the Green Children, and some of the one that John Macklin writes about, this boy that appears during a storm in France with 3 fingers and 3 toes, and his rib cage is upside down. If these stories are true, it's like these people or whatever they are have come out of someplace else, and perhaps this young boy isn't supposed to have lived. But just fascinating, and it's easy. I mean. The nuts and bolts flesh and blood researcher is going to ignore the fringe stuff anyway. And when you get these one-offs, it's like, no, we don't want to deal with that. That's a little bit too weird. Let's begin to close out now. Zelia, do you have any cool story, anything from just another tinfoil hat, or just anything cool anecdote you want to leave us with before we wrap up?
Oh boy!
Yeah, I know that's easy, right?
Man, there's too much that's occurring to me.
I didn't prepare her for this at all.
Gosh, let me think.
Actually,
there is a case that I covered a while ago, which I would just like to leave off with, and that is the Cusack encounter out of France in 1967.
Yes.
So I guess to kind of cap off the evening, this is, again, I will say this probably for almost every case, one of my favorite cases because I believe that it really shows kind of the intersection of the fairy faith and the more modern take of flying saucers. Because it occurred in 1967. It was actually 2 children, a young boy named Francois and his younger sister Anne-Marie, and they were watching a herd of cows. And all of a sudden they noticed this. First, they noticed what they thought were these children playing in a nearby field. But then on closer inspection, they realized that these kids were kind of funny looking, and they were also accompanied by a large luminous sphere of some shiny or like really, really bright, brilliant material. Suddenly they realized that these weren't children at all. There were these 4 entities, and they were covered in what they described as a seamless, silky black outfit. They had pointed chins, pointed ears, and appeared to have beards as well. And these 4 entities were kind of, there was one that was taller, that was furthest to the left. It almost appeared to be a leader and was holding a mirror-like object. While the others, apparently one of them was actually like digging kind of in the dirt. Now, when the kids noticed them, one by one, they actually flew up and delved deep, like into the object without any visible entry point. So again, that's a detail too observed in the Trasco encounter and then also the Everett Clark encounter on that same day. These entities just vanishing into these luminous objects. So the craft apparently took off with a strange whistling noise. And the interesting thing is actually, so it's these 2 kids who are watching cattle. That's a very folkloric setup. But then, too, they weren't alone in seeing or witnessing something because actually a nearby police officer who was off duty also heard this strange whistling type noise. So it's this fantastic account that at the time it was handled in a very ufological manner. I remember, I think it was the Flying Saucer Review that carried the article on it. I might be wrong on that.
No,
and
that's true. And I think I think the editor of the time, was it Crichton? I'm not sure. Went there to investigate it.
Yeah. And, there was discussion on how, maybe the reason that they vanished into the object without a visible entry point was some sort of, cloud that was actually designed to be a cloaking device. And, the girl noticed landing gear while the boy didn't. And, so too, you have this weird discrepancy. And that doesn't, to me, of course, a discrepancy between 2 witnesses, recounting of events, that can be a sign that there's some sort of fabrication going on. However, it can also be a sign that possibly the witnesses truly did observe separate things. And especially in this case, the children, they really had no reason to make this up. They also were not aware of any thing regarding UFOs or anything like that. And they were frightened for days after the event. Apparently, the girl refused to like sleep in her own room, and they actually were crying when they were discussing it. So it's just one of these fantastic accounts because, of course, handled in a ufological manner, we also see this very common scenario that, they were taking soil samples to take back to their, mothership so that they could tell what Earth is made out of. But in reality, if we go back a century or two, if you saw a small entity, messing around with the soil, it was natural because fairies were associated with the earth and farming.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a very, very bizarre case. One of my favorites.
Excellent. Well, Zelia, tell us again where we can find you. I know you're co-authoring a book, which is probably going to be out this year sometime, maybe.
Yeah, I'm feeling hopeful about that deadline, and I am beyond excited about this. Again, paranormal researchers and authors have been my idols. Like growing up, these were the people I looked up to. So the idea that I am currently working on a paranormal book with Dean Bertram of the podcast Talking Weird is it's fantastic. I couldn't be more excited.
Oh, and I almost forgot. Tell us about the book that's just out that you wrote a foreword to.
Yes, that's another thing that I couldn't be more excited about. I wrote the foreword for Chad Lewis's new book, Supernatural Dares of the Midwest. And I have to tell you, talk about surreal. It's an absolute honor to have been included on that. And the book is fantastic. I have to say that, the dare approach to the paranormal too is such a unique take because really, as a paranormal researcher myself, the thing that you're really looking for is a way to engage with a phenomenon. And dares really offer, that chance because it is literally a request to interact with something. And beyond that, too, it just shows the folklore also associated with these paranormal hotspots, as well as actual accounts of paranormal phenomena. It's just definitely a fantastic book. I could not recommend it more.
And tell us the dare that you underwent with Chad Lewis supervising.
Actually, that was probably over a decade long in the making. It was the Bloody Mary Dare. We actually faced the terror at the Van Meter Visitor Festival of 2019. And, I got to tell you, Steve, that, I've been researching the paranormal forever. And the Bloody Mary Dare was the one thing that actually freaked me out. Like countless other kids, I probably heard it first in grade school. And it just, the concept that at any point you can call something upon you like that was a lot for me. I had thought about spontaneous human combustion and alien abductions by then, but man, I'm telling you, Bloody Mary appearing in a bathroom mirror, no.
And it took place, Andy, in a dingy motel west of Van Meter, and I witnessed it.
Yeah, and we're both
all
here
I can say is 30 plus years of magical invocation. The Bloody Mary means nothing. That's just a walk in the park. Come on now.
Oh boy. Yeah, I mean, to this day, we're both still alive. We haven't suffered any of the myriad fates that apparently await those who conjure her, gouged out eyes, let's see, stab wounds, just dying, bad luck.
It seems to me an episode of Supernatural dramatized that one time. I think it's one of the few episodes I saw where, of course, when they do a Bloody Mary Dare in the TV show Supernatural, it's not benign. Let's leave it at
yes.
Oh, yeah. But no, truly, it was such an honor to be asked to write the foreword for that. And seriously, just so super surreal.
So you're going to be speaking at Butler Paranormal at the end of April, the Van Meter Visitor Festival at the end of September. We're hoping to get you on a pilgrimage to Point Pleasant once or twice this year. It could happen.
Oh, yes.
And at Point Pleasant, West Virginia, home of the Mothman, where John Keel did his research. What else do we need to do to promote for you?
Well, pretty much anything that I am doing is on my website, justanothertinfoilhat.com. Of course, I've got my YouTube channel, which is called also justanothertinfoilhat.com. And, if you want exclusive content, you can check out Patreon, which is surprisingly, please fasten your seatbelts for this, also listed under Just Another Tinfoil Hat.
You need to trademark that name. You really need to trademark that name,
That is actually a very good point. I should probably do that.
Definitely.
Well, it's really, I'm really happy to have you back on the show.
This
Zelia.
was an awesome time. Thank you so much for having me back on the show. And Andy, it was fantastic catching up with you too. This was really fun.
Yes, it's great to have Andy back as co-host with you returning on the show.
I feel a bit rusty, actually. It's been quite a while, hasn't it?
And we already talked about your books. They can find your books on Amazon, Andy?
Mine, you can find stuff from Three Hands Press. I've got 2 books out with them, with the Wiki Shoddy Cave, the Witchcraft book, and the Dante, which is called The Underworld Gnosis. You can get those. I believe that. I'm not sure that one's on Amazon, but the first one definitely is. My other books are with Troy Books, Troy, Troy Books here in the UK. They don't currently sell via Amazon, but I think the paperbacks may become available through Amazon. At the moment, they do hardbacks and paperbacks, and they may be available through them. Otherwise, Troy Books Direct is an easy way to get hold of their stuff. So,
sounds good. Well, listen, thank you both for being here. This has been a great show. And sit tight. I'm going to do my closeout. The High Strangeness Factor was created by Steve Ward and Andy Mercer and is copyrighted on the Paranormal UK Radio Network. As always, I want to thank our fearless leaders, Irene Allen Block and Mark Johnson, here at the network. I want to thank Andy Mercer again as in his capacity as producer. Even if he's not seen on the show is won't be aired without him. I also want to thank Brian Zeller, who created the great music for the show. I have a Facebook page called The Phantom Menagerie you can check out. And I'm also on Mac Maloney's Military X-Files weekly as a correspondent. And I am Steve Ward, your humble host here on the High Strangeness Factor, a displaced Yank here on the Paranormal UK Radio Network. Thank you for listening. I will see you all again in a fortnight. Take care.